hello, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I tried to give the best intro I could for what is your work and how we know each other. But I guess now during the conversation, yeah, people will see where is our connection and yeah, why I invited you, to talk about all this. So yeah, as we planned yesterday, let's start easy. So Fede, tell me, what do you think is shamanism? Why are we talking about it today?
Well, I think shamanism is the kind of the oldest form of art, and where art comes from, and is where also religion comes from. But the important thing about shamanism is that it's also we could say the origin of consciousness. If we stick to McKenna's idea of the Stone Ape theory, that shamanism is the origin of what actually makes us human. That's the difference. But if you ask me, my definition, it will be that shamanism is the way that we communicate with the other realms of existence that are not visible, that are not material and not three-dimensional. And that's the way for humans to interact with that dimension and make changes that can affect the reality here. So that's where magic enters a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that was the side that captured me quite immediately, because when I read about shamanism, it sounded like too archaic and that I couldn't really place it on the modern times. So then when I started to read about magic and the idea of, yeah, that you can, I like, for example, what McKenna said, no, like, if the universe, it's a code, then it can be hacked, like that one was very, very important for me. Okay, guys, sorry for the change of plans. Now it looks like finally Fede's setup is working. Let me check. Fede, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah, all right, there. Yeah, man. Okay. So, Fede, let's start totally again, bro.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, let's go from zero again, and please tell us a little what is shamanism, why you think we need to talk about it today. Yeah, what is shamanism for you?
Yeah, I gave a few definitions before, but the one that is more important for me is that shamanism is the primordial way, the original way to communicate with other realms of existence. We know this reality is not all that there is to the universe. There are other realms of experience that are mostly inner realms, and shamanism is the way to interact with these dimensions that humans have discovered a long, long time ago, and it's actually what made us humans. According to Terence McKenna's theory, we'll be talking a lot about Terence and his ideas that have had so much influence on us. I think that's a bit what made us good friends from the beginning as well. Like, we are both Terence friends. So
yeah, wow. Yeah, like I was saying before, also just to set the mood again, for me, definitely I come from more the tradition of like reading Magick. No, for me, the first things I read was like shamanism. I consider this like archaic ancient thing that I couldn't fit on the modern world. And then I discovered chaos magic, Aleister Crowley, and all this idea that, yes, that altered states could really help you to change your reality, or at least change yourself. And then, yeah, when I found McKenna, I found a lot of humor and warmth and good vibes. Terence is it's a warm character.
Yeah, yes, he's the greatest voice of psychedelics. He's like the mushroom talking. Like his experiment with Dennis he made in the jungle, like it actually worked, and so he like forever kept his that state of consciousness that was like so like communicative with the other side. I was talking about before, the side of the invisible, how they called it the invisible landscape. So I think shamanism is a way to connect with this landscape, the invisible landscape, and the energies that inhabit it, we could say, and how it's so intertwined with our everyday reality, but we don't know it, especially nowadays that shamanism is so lost in our culture. So the importance of shamanism is to regain access to these dimensions that define our reality, even though we don't know it. That's where magic comes in. The shamanism is a form of magic.
Yeah,
it's the primordial form of magic.
Exactly. Like me, I wanted, one second. So I was saying yesterday I showed you this book of Peter Carroll that actually I noticed. I was trying to look for internet for a diagram where that exists. And wait, I'm going to have it here. But it's pretty cool because he tries to make like a flow chart of the history of magic and shamanism. So basically here, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it so properly, but I love that he puts the start of everything is shamanism. And then he goes through all the history of Western magic and gets to like Golden Dawn and all this. But I love that his connection with sorcery and witchcraft go directly connected to shamanism. So for me, that was very interesting too, when I discovered chaos magic and all the modern approach of like hackers approaching magic and psychedelic culture. And that also really affected me, the rediscovery of what was shamanism in the 90s. Definitely McKenna helped a lot, but also all these guys that were with computers and also taking drugs and posting weird shit. So I guess both you and me also come a lot from that internet culture, super underground, of not famous people that shared a lot and knew a lot.
Yeah, that's where, well, that will be like the end of the path we're going to be talking about, but how psychedelic trance puts all these elements together, from shamanism to the use of technology to the underground culture to counterculture, and how that it's the modern way of bringing it all together. It's the culture that unifies all these elements that brings shamanism into the future, we could say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting. Okay, so wait, let's try to like think all of this together with you. So the idea that I wanted to introduce is that for me, what we're doing is like a cartography of the relation of human and their consciousness and the way they access, information and how we relate to those planes, how we can interact and how we can bring things back from those planes. Even we kind of part from the point that we consider that those planes exist and that the exchange of information is happening. So maybe
yeah, for sure.
Like I would say we are definitely subscribing to that. No, we believe in that. So maybe we can start with the beginning. Fede, maybe we can go to what I think it's what we both agree that is a starting point of consciousness that McKenna describes. I think it's maybe either in Food of the Gods or...
Yes, Food of the Gods, where he explained this theory.
So yeah, take us through a little of that theory, Fede.
Well, there's a gap, in the way that scientists see the evolution of humanity, and the so-called the lost link between the animals and us. So where does consciousness emerge? So what McKenna says is that consciousness emerges in the moment that we find psychedelic plants. While we were eating everything we will find, and particularly when we're still like in the Neolithic, we were like following cattle, and the easiest plant to find that has a shamanic effect on human mind were mushrooms, because they are readily available. You only need to eat it. While we were eating everything we could find, we find the mushroom. So eating these mushrooms makes an explosion in the proto-hominid minds, because it's today has been proved with scientific method that psilocybin in particular enhances connections in the brain, creates new connections, and stimulates the generation of new neurons and new neural paths. So that's how the mind became aware of itself and a different relation to its surroundings.
So
that's what made us humans.
McKenna basically says that mushrooms gave us consciousness. I mean, he goes directly.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. and intelligence.
No anesthesia for this idea. He just throws it there.
Yeah. It's not like today is an agreement that was not only that, no, there were other factors that concorded with the consumption of mushrooms that made the consciousness appears on humans. But yeah, the key element, the magical element, were psilocybin, and it's pretty interesting idea because you cannot deny it, how that molecule is so much like our neurotransmitters. It's so much like serotonin, and particularly DMT, that also have been found that it's produced in the human body,
And for me, I remember reading all of that. There was one guy that tried to give a little less crazy version of this idea. And he said that also maybe in very low doses, mushroom could help you to hunt better, and like some little sharpening of your perception that could have helped in the nomad times.
Yes, because it enhances the vision, enhances like how to distinguish the shapes and three-dimensional view of stuff, and also to stimulate procreation and the bonding between the groups. So we kind of became more like we could say like a tribe, under the effects of this, feeling the connection that we have with the people around us and the surrounding, the nature, which is something we can prove today when we have a psychedelic experience, that you can go deep, that have a Nicolas, and feel really connected to the whole universe, depending on how deep you go, but starting to melt your limits, and melt yourself with your environment, and realize that life is a whole net of life, that everything is interrelated.
So, okay, here we are in the times where let's say that is the childhood of psychedelic experience in humankind. There's still almost no consciousness. Consciousness starts to appear. So basically, slowly we know that there started to be some religions formed, some cults formed, that where all these sacred plants took place, and they became like the axis almost of their civilization. But then at one point, slowly, like because this is all the archaic ancient times that we basically are theorizing what happened. We are not very sure. Then we have a little of the evidence of what happened with the first tribes and the first cults with sacred plants in Latin America, in Asia. But I was very interested in it because I remember when we were talking about, I don't know if you want to jump directly now to what is at least the last record that we have of shamanism being used, at least in the Western world, with Eleusis, or maybe first we should go with Mircea Eliade.
No, that's a good point. I will mention before that in every culture there is shamanism, except in our culture. Every culture in the world that has surfaced has a way of shamanism, because it's the primordial religion, we could say. It's the original religion of the whole humanity. That's pretty powerful, because today our culture, our civilization denies the shamanism, and denies the plants, and denies all the access that we can have to these dimensions and these kind of experiences that also are a tool to regain the power of our own consciousness in moments where we are taking that power away from us. So it was every culture that had the use of plants. Every culture was a shamanic culture, and every religion have a shamanic origin. It's pretty interesting.
And it's true that they didn't persecute it in any way. No, it was like official by the state, official state shamans and everything.
Yeah, it was not only not persecuted, but was like the most sacred thing that you will take care of and have super respect. It was not a game. It is not a game. Shamanism is not a game. So that's very important to remember. And now in these days that everything is like a commodity, well, shamanism hasn't got that to that point. It kind of got close, where ayahuasca is like an experience sold for everyone today. But the shamanic dimension is something that modern culture cannot completely digest, because it breaks it apart. Yeah.
Grant Morrison actually said that, like, give me the mainstream, give me the big stage, because I'll make something that is so toxically psychedelic that even if you try to absorb it, it's going to destroy you and convert you into one of us, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a concept that Hakim Bey also develops, that the system can eat everything and digest like trash, shitty version of everything, taking the power away, but it could not do it with shamanism. This somehow escapes this machine that eats everything and destroys everything, but because maybe it will destroy it, as has been proved in the psychedelic revolution, which is also something we will be talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, the main syntaxis of what happens in shamanism when it's done in a real way, definitely it's a very, very different idea of subjectivity, than what the capitalism tries to give you. Definitely, shamanism is a way to take back control of your consciousness, of your reality, to design it again. And yeah, definitely that's not very compatible with an oppression system.
No, absolutely not. And at the time it has been like massified, the psychedelic experience, it was the most revolutionary point in time. But we don't go there yet. Before we were at the point where shamanism was all around the world. Every culture was shamanic, including our Western culture, and particularly the Greek people, with the Eleusinian mysteries. There were rituals made to the goddess Demeter. That's why I use that nickname, because that's the last point where people with our mindset kind of more closely to us was experiencing this. And all the Greek philosophy, at school we are taught that, the great Greek philosophers, man, why were they so great? Because they had still access to these dimensions, They don't teach you that at school.
But Eleusina's Mysteries, was it an underground cult of Greece, or it was accepted and a social thing?
No, it was totally accepted. It was like super sacred. It was a rite of passage. Everyone will go. Not everyone, but certain chosen people was initiated into this experience, and was definitely a psychedelic ritual. But that remained hidden until the 20th century, where the work of Albert Hoffman, Gordon Wasson, and Carl Ruck had this theory, and they proved it, that it was certainly like this, that in Eleusis, the people were having psychedelic experience within a ritual, because the ritual is so important. That's what we lack in our modern culture. We have the lack of ritual. So it's not enough just to have the psychedelic ingestion. You need a proper context, a proper intention. You need to focus it in a way that this experience will be something meaningful to you. That's so important. So we had shamanic humanity like for hundreds of thousands of years. And the last time we had that, it was in Eleusis in Occident, until Christianism arrived and destroyed everything. But Eleusis, it lasted like for 2,000 years almost.
They are, for example, very interested in the work of Deleuze and Guattari. Me, I'm like a broken record. No, I always go back to them, but they really talk about deeply philosophically what Christianity did, and for them, the main point of their schizoanalysis, which is our system, is to analyze things from the point of view of what subjectivity they are trying to create. And with Christianity, it was really the most widespread formatting of ideas and differences and trying to make everything the fucking same, so they can finally then again make all their divisions and all their lines to control everyone. And I have to say, it was like maybe one of the biggest like evil spells, no, in humanity. What happened with Christianity, how they separated, the direct connection with God, the the tools, the rituals, the way to get that information, be it God or be it the spirits. They finally also reduced everything to just one God, and they like basically killed all the heterogeneous religions. And there, yeah, it's quite interesting, because there I would say it's the first moment that we lose the control of our consciousness, and suddenly it becomes a thing of power. And there is a real battle, no? With Christianity, definitely we see like the first moments where all these ideas need to go underground because they're really persecuted, and they are really willing to burn witches, for example, when what we saw with Christianity. And also, for example, there is interesting what happened with alchemy. No, I would say there alchemy is in the way the beginning of what is the Western occultism tradition and magic. But in the end, it's also kind of rooted a little bit with the shamanism from the Druids, for example, inside the British Islands. And even Merlin was supposed, to be one of those related to those Druids. So, for example, there, Fede, what's your view? What happened that suddenly shamanism and magic became an underground thing and became a persecuted thing? And yeah, how do you see shamanism surviving in those times?
Well, I think what Christianity did was the worst. McKenna says this too. It was the worst thing that happened to humanity, because they annihilated every form of connection to the spirit, and saying the only way is through us, and the only God that exists is our God, and everything else is prohibited. Shamanism only survived very, very underground, and also had to adopt elements of Christianity to survive. We see that in the New World, in all across America, which is the place where most shamanic cultures survive and most shamanic plants actually still grow. And the first accounts of shamanism in the modern world were those accounts by the first priests that were to America and saw the Indians doing peyote. They saw it as a demonic thing. So the first accounts,
of course, imagine also not to be like I don't know, 1,400 priests that comes in a boat 6 months, and then you go to Amazon and you see these guys blowing chopo into each other's brains. It's the devil for sure.
Yeah. So it was a great loss. I think that's one of the greatest losses of our race, to lose original cultures, aboriginal cultures that had so much to teach us. We deviated so much from nature and from shamanic cultures that we ended up like this, having no spirituality as a modern society. And that has been lost, because I think spirituality needs to be an individual thing first. You have to have your own spiritual experience to have a real power of your consciousness, to have your real ground on how you relate to the universe. It had to be yours. It cannot be someone else's experience. And so Christianity, what did was prohibit this completely. They will fucking tie you to a post and burn you down for doing that.
Like, there was really a moment where if you fucking collect herbs and make medicine from the forest and you were a woman, they could burn you.
Yeah, not only women, men too, or
your neighbor didn't like you, and then he made the accusation, or he wants to take your land, and also you're to the fucking fire.
Fuck yeah, it was crazy. This lasted like 1,000 years.
So this is like the dark times, no, for psychedelic culture and shamanism. But at the same time, this is a very European-centered vision, no, because the people in the
Yes, of
mountains of Mexico were blasting mushrooms and they didn't care, you know.
Yeah.
The people in Amazon jungle, they were pretty much uninterrupted, no, with their tradition and ceremonies, even when colonization came. So in the end, it's true, as we are Europeans, and at least that's the education we got, especially as Argentinians, that we are all sons of Europeans. I guess it's good to talk like that, no? Because, yeah, for the Western world, this was the Dark Ages, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the cultures were not still doing the rituals and their own like information exchanges. It was just that suddenly the West and the ideas of the West suddenly started to permeate all around the world. It started to go with fucking boats and slave people and kill them if they don't agree with them. And definitely there you see that the battle was not just for the resources or for the like the physical things. There was really a full battle of the paradigm of what is, you know, society, human beings, you know, who is in power, what are the ideas, you know, that will keep this power and serve this power, what are the ideas that, you know, definitely don't serve it. And then, yeah, imagine before they could just kill them. It's you know, there are some been advancements now that at least some people can disagree without getting killed immediately. But back then there was absolutely no chance. No, it was really fucking white people going around the world destroying every other culture for a while, for some long time.
Yes, this was what you were saying about the idea of the list, that they like reseted the human matrix. You know, you cannot, you have to have our paradigm or you are erased from existence. But as you were saying, luckily, on the most remote regions of South America, shamanism remained, but it was like almost a miracle, you know, like in the most remote mountains and in the middle of the jungle where white Europeans did not reach, that this cult survived. So it wasn't until actually the 20th century that we had a revival of shamanism, a notice that this was happening, that was still happening, because it was completely lost. They did a pretty good job erasing these other ways to see the world.
I now okay, there was a dark time, and definitely we know that, and now we are conscious of that. So then what starts to happen in the West? Because, okay, we know that the original tribe still existed. They didn't give a fuck about the West. But in the West, I would say that now we can finally get maybe to the first moments where some artists or writers start to mention the psychedelic experience, basically. I mean, maybe where should we go? Is it Aldous Huxley or Watson that we should go first?
Yes, when the time when the Western culture regains knowledge of these ancient rituals and that know that these things still happen or were possible, it was very, very underground in the 19th century. The first account, if we're going really, really to the first, was with Lewis Carroll's publication of Alice in Wonderland. It was like 1862, I think. It was the time where...
Yeah, I mean, they're eating mushrooms, I guess. Yeah. I mean,
yes.
We're not just mushrooms. Did he ever admit it, like in writing, that it was amanita or psilocibe, or it's just a theory?
No, it's just a theory, but it's curious that at the same time that he publishes this book, there was another book published where the first mentions of Siberian shamanism still happening and using mushrooms, and also peyote in United States. So there's a book that mentions both of these cults which use psychedelic plants, and it was published just before Lewis Carroll published Alice in Wonderland. So there's kind of a proof that he had this information, but it was not mentioned. Like you said, he was not saying, "Oh, he used this mushroom. Alice is eating this mushroom," but it's the first mention that it gets into popular culture that a psychedelic plant is used. But we have to go like 100 years into the future, into the 20th century, where Aldous Huxley has this experience with mescaline so famous that he writes about in Doors of Perception, where he also gets this information to a wider audience than really started changing pop culture. It was almost at the same time that Huxley publishes Doors of Perception with his account with mescaline that Robert Gordon Wasson, which was a banker from the US who had a real great interest in mycology, he finds out, he is told that there are some mushroom cults still exist in some remote regions of Mexico in Oaxaca. So he was obsessed with mushrooms, and this guy made a good research and had his trip with his wife going to the Mazateca Mountains and finds the most famous shaman of the 20th century, which is Maria Sabina. So Gordon Wasson was the first modern Westerner to participate in this kind of rituals that were lost for so many time.
So wait, Aldous Huxley didn't have any contact with Wasson or what he was doing. This more or less happened all simultaneously.
Yes, it happened simultaneously because we can mention that since Albert Hofmann's discovery of LSD and the prior discovery of mescaline by German chemists, they started to see that some pharmacological agents had a profound impact on the mind, but this was totally taken out of context. It was not in the proper shamanic context. It was like from a scientific point of view, they discovered these substances and they started experimenting with it. And that brings a birth to the modern era of psychopharmacology, because before that, we didn't know anything about the brain, about consciousness, about how to modify it. So after Albert Hofmann's discovery, it starts to expand, but very only since a scientific point of view, without all the magic and the shamanic ritual around it.
Yeah,
Until Wasson.
Okay. So that's interesting. To what was, for example, me now I was trying to look for the picture of Wasson recording Maria Sabina. Is that the first time he was there?
I'm not sure he got the recorder thing the first time he went there, because he made many trips to Sabina's house. I think it was not the first time he went there, because at first he didn't know if he was going to be allowed into the ceremony, because some other anthropologists had participated in the ritual but had not eaten the mushroom because it was forbidden to white people to participate in this ritual. So Wasson was the first one that dared to do it, and by the shaman. So this is a very key moment in the 20th century and in psychedelic culture.
Okay. So was Wasson really kind of the first Westerner to take serious participation in a real archaic ritual?
Yes, for sure. He was the first one.
Wow. So here you cannot see Fede right now, but I'm showing people that amazing picture of Wasson in the dark room with that crazy fucking magnetophone recording the ritual. I guess these are the pictures of the Live magazine, no?
Yes, Life magazine article, which was the article that influenced a lot of people, because Life magazine was a pretty popular magazine, and he got this article published about his trip to Mexico, and it had a great impact in many, many people who later became psychedelic proponents. For example, Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and other scholars that were really influenced by this. They say, okay, well, this is happening, I got to know what's going on there. So a lot of people started going to the Mazateca Sierra to find out what was this about, magic happening, what is this? I have to go to find this out.
Yeah, okay, and on a special note, what a lucky thing that somehow they connected with Maria Sabina, which also it's a very particular shaman and one of these self-taught shamans that got the download since they were very young. And yeah, I can share a little more. For example, the story with her sister, how she was able to heal her sister through using mushrooms, and that she was literally able to tap into into matter when she was in this state and really healed people. And I just saw in the chat, I just wanted to clarify. So it's not that Maria Sabina was calling mushrooms the flesh of gods. This is actually the old way to call mushrooms. They really call them teonanacatl, which means literally the flesh of gods. So this was the word for the mushrooms. They were taking them since many thousands of years. So this word is probably an Aztec word, I imagine. And yeah, maybe even did Maria Sabina have another way to call mushrooms?
No. Or she called them in Spanish Niños Santos, but the the traditional word for it was Teonanacatl, which is very impressive, because these cultures had it very clear what where they were dealing with.
Yes, here now I'm showing to people the famous picture of Maria like drying the mushrooms and preparing the doses next to Gordon taking some notes about I don't know what the fuck. So yeah, amazing moment. What year are we here, Fede?
Yeah, it was 1953.
So, okay, now we are in what we could consider the rediscovery of these shamanic and sacred plant cultures from the West. And as you were saying, this also had this Life magazine article that became very popular and it affected a lot of people. So maybe we can go a little through there. Tell us again in detail what happened, who read this article, and maybe we can start with the Timothy Leary story, for example.
Well, I would like to point out that some people in the West, particularly the CIA, were already behind this story before it happened. They were spying on Gordon Wasson on his first trip. They already knew somehow that he was going to find something pretty interesting, so they put a CIA agent on his first trip to Mexico, which I find pretty amazing that these guys already knew that something was going on there and they didn't want to miss out on it. So they put a CIA agent, man, on the first trip to find the mushroom. That's pretty crazy.
I wonder, in that ceremony, was Gordon the only foreigner taking mushrooms, or did the CIA spy take two?
No, he didn't take it. He was the one taking the pictures. I think all the pictures that you were showing to the people were taken by the CIA agent because he was a photographer.
Sponsored by CIA the whole trip. Fuck, man.
Yeah. It was not actually sponsored. Watson was not aware that he was being spied by the CIA because he's a banker, and some people think, oh, he might be working for the CIA. No, he didn't have any clue of that.
No, yeah,
we later knew of it. But this photographer, what did, he also took a mushroom sample and took it back to the CIA, and they gave it to a mycology company, and they said to them, you have to grow this mushroom for us now. And they grew like tons of psilocybin mushrooms. They were the first ones to grow mushrooms, because they also were experimenting with LSD at that point. On the project MK Ultra, which is a kind of famous right now, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, okay. Before we go like a little later in America, maybe we can go again. So okay, Wasson was there. He wrote the article. Maybe and now we know that the fucking CIA was there. So then definitely we need to like put a pin in this point and come back again when more things happen and suddenly they have more reasons to get involved. Because slowly the cat was out of the bag, let's say, like the information was slowly out there. And there maybe we can go, to what happened to, let's say, the good side when they find this information. As we know, for example, probably Burroughs and the Beatniks also read this article, or Shaggy Letters is previous?
No, Shaggy Letters is after that, but we have to mention this other important character, which is Richard Evans Schultes, which was the director of the Botanical Museum of Harvard. This guy was studying, he's the real Indiana Jones. Maybe you can show a picture of him. The character of Indiana Jones is pretty much based on Schultes. This guy was traveling, yes, for sure. This guy was traveling the Amazon jungle. He was traveling to Afghanistan. He was traveling meeting all the Aboriginal peoples and really getting close to them and learning from them about their plants they were using. Most of these plants that we know now and we mention and are so famous, like ayahuasca, for example, their scientific name was given by Schultes. So Schultes is a very important character in the whole story as well, because he was later connected with Albert Hoffman, with Jonathan Ott, with a lot of people that made important works in psychedelic culture.
So, what is the starting point for Schultes? Why he decides to? Because what is his connection? You know, how he discovers it? Did he have a connection with Wasson?
The connection with Wasson happens later. O sea, Wasson finds out about Schultes' work because Schultes was previously working with it
And
without
how the fuck?
psychedelics.
How the fuck Schultes get the inspiration or started to discover psychedelics?
Because he was a botanist. He was studying plants. So he was traveling through the jungle and seeing the Indians using these weird plants, and he saw the rituals for himself. He also drank ayahuasca. He participated in a lot of these rituals before any other Westerner. So this guy also published his work with all these tribes that were using plants. He was a real pioneer. And so all of, not all, but most of the ethnobotanic work of the 20th century was based on Schultes' work.
Okay, so this guy was really the adventurer, and also
Yes.
I guess he was more into the academic side, no? Like more like an outsider
For
anthropologist. He wasn't like so spiritual, let's say.
No, not at all. Not at all. He was purely scientific, and he didn't like when the beatniks started following his paths to go after these plants that he was finding. He was not cool with Westerners appropriating the Aboriginal rituals and their plants. You know. Also,
So there
the
we
beatnik.
yeah, we kind of completed there, like, let's say, like the academic scientific side, no? Like Wasson studying the mushrooms, Schultes traveling around trying to classify all the plants, and then exactly we slowly start to get that moment where it escapes the safe part of the laboratory and the academic circles. So yeah, please go on. Definitely, I think it's the beatniks, the first people that are more punk about it.
Yes, yeah, for sure. They were experimenting everything and also setting the mindset for the hippie movement. They were like the precursors of the hippie movement for sure. And their hippie spirit really comes from them because they were also experimenting with Eastern philosophy, Eastern practices, incorporating Buddhism into their lives, smoking weed a lot. But it's at this point where the psychedelics escape the lab, and because the interest was sparked by Huxley's book, mainly Dose of Perception, because Huxley was a really respected writer, you know, and the Life magazine too. So guys like Timothy Leary went to Mexico and had their own rituals with Maria Sabina and other shamans. So these guys came back with their mind totally blown apart by this experience, and they say, okay, we need to take this experience to everyone. Everyone needs to do this. You know, in West, that is what we are lacking. We are lacking a connection with these dimensions, which can revolutionize everything.
So that's sorry, just to stop you 1 second, so we give more info to people, because yeah, for us maybe it's like we read it and it's so obvious, but basically the Doors of Perception is an account of Aldous Huxley and his mescaline experience. No, it's nothing else than that. It's not hidden in any story or metaphor, and it was given to him by his psychologist, no, Humphrey Osmond.
Yes, which is also an interesting character, because this guy is the guy who created the term psychedelic. This term was not in existence at that time. Psychedelics were called psychotomimetics, you know, that things that mimic schizophrenia and all these kind of things were like fear, you know, how they saw it with a lot of fear, and because no one dared to try it themselves, except for some pioneers that did it. So Humphrey Osmond is the guy who develops this concept of psychedelic, which means psyche, which means soul. It's not mind as we understand it today. It was the soul, and delos, which means revealing. So psychedelics is what reveals the soul. It's a very nice word. It's a very nice concept.
Yeah, I mean, it fits like a fucking glove, no? It's
Yeah.
really what it's doing. Either if it's a bad trip or a good trip, that's what's going on.
Yes, there was the phrase, he was exchanging letters with Aldous Huxley, and Huxley had a really ugly word which we proposed for the psychedelic term. I don't remember it now, but it was a really
He got a
awful
little
sounding. And this guy said, to soar hell or taste angelic, take a pinch of psychedelic. That was his phrase.
Back, also, William Blake has a pretty few good ones to describe this of hanging in the edge of the abyss, and yeah, about to stop existing. Yeah, and he calls the mind the force manacles, no, like this thing that is keeping you inside. So okay, wait. Now before we step into what happened with Timothy Leary and the legacy of what the beatnik people did for America, all this time while these things are happening in America, there was some Swiss guy working on some things also in Europe. So maybe we can finally dedicate some time to Albert, no? And maybe let's go directly with our theory, Fede. Like, I think we all know more or less that Albert Hofmann is the creator of acid, but let's go a little on how he discovered it. What was he was working on? Why did he do this substance? And how did he end up feeling like he should try it?
It's a very mystical story because Albert Hofmann is a very mystical character himself. He had mystical experiences as he was a child. He was very connected with nature. He was very connected with art and human emotions. And he said that he was more oriented to art actually when he was young and started thinking of pursuing a career in art. But he got this change where he went to study the hard sciences, chemistry, which is all about atoms and matter. But it's so mystical that he ended up joining in this art with the matter. LSD is like the molecule that will transform human consciousness and human culture forever. So it's pretty crazy because he was not looking for anything like this. He was working with lysergic acid analogs, and he was trying to create a cardiac stimulant, a blood stimulant.
Yeah, I think he read the old texts of the midwives, no, the women that take care of the women that are pregnant, and he discovered they were using ergot to treat hemorrhages. So he discovered that probably ergot regulates the blood clots and the blood vessels.
Yes.
And then he also proposed that probably could be used for an analgesic, no? So that's why he was working with ergot.
Yes, and he saw that the nicotinic acid, diethylamide, was a cardiac stimulant. So he thought, why not make a diethylamide of the lysergic acid? So he did it in 1938. But they tested it in animals, like was regular at Sandoz laboratories. They will not try the substances themselves. They gave it to animals. So if you give acid to an animal, they could not see that they were tripping. They had some reactions, but the rats could not tell them, man, this is getting weird. So it sat in his shelf like for 5 years, actually, until he had this strange, this premonition, his intuition, we could call it. I think that's the word he uses. He had this intuition that it was some.
He said the word peculiar feeling, no? Something like this. And he said that he never had one of those again ever in his life.
Yeah. It was so mystical that this happened. This substance had to come into this realm.
I'm going to show people the famous Alex Gray painting.
Oh, it's amazing, man.
That he's exactly showing that moment. So guys, here, if you never notice, there is like a crazy thing floating on top that is dropping a little drop here on the molecule of LSD. This is supposed to represent that angel alien that came to tell to Albert, man, go to that shelf again and check that compound again.
Because he had made a lot of compounds. That's why LSD is 25. He was making a series of acid analogs, and the number 25 was curiously the one that was calling him, by this peculiar feeling, intuition. So he synthesizes it again, and when he's finishing the crystallization, which is the last step in the synthesis of LSD, he starts feeling weird, and so he decides to stop his work and go home. And at that time, there was war, and there were no cars allowed, so he had to take his bike with his assistant, and so here comes the famous bike ride to his house on acid. First acid trip ever.
The first human being in motherfucking existence.
Yeah.
And okay, here, Fede, let's throw in our theory. Like, how is possible that a top scientist, super careful, that has worked so much in a laboratory with, I'm sure, proper insane Swiss regulations that must be even over the top of how careful they work, how is possible that a grown man drop a little bit of this compound? What did he say? That it fell on his hand, he said, and it was the...
No, he does not say about how it entered his body. And there's this chemist, Dave Nichols, which is a popular chemist which has made a lot of work. He's a disciple of Alexander Shulgin, and he has a write-up which is published on Erowid, where he says, man, the way that Germans and Swiss scientists work, as chemists in particular, it's impossible to get this enter your body. And what Nichols says, he says, I made acid 1,000 times, and I never got high of doing it. And I also put it purposefully in my skin. It will not get me high, So it's kind of mystical how it entered. It's also kind of mystical how this intuition came to him to, you need to check this compound. And it's also weird. So what Nichols proposes is that the first time Albert Hoffman did not get in contact with LSD is that he had a spontaneous mystical experience, which he already had as he was a child. And because also in the Hoffman description, he says the visions only lasted 2 hours. And we know that no acid trip lasts 2 hours, it can last like 10, 12 hours.
Yeah, because here also we are... This, you and me, we both know, but we should share to the people. So in my Kinderstock, like my problem child of Hoffman describes that when he was young, he had some moments where he was in the forest and he had like what we could call a spiritual experience in a way. And he describes feeling elated and euphoric and seeing lights and pretty much describing what is like a very early infant, experiencing some spiritual moment. So definitely when he describes this in the book, he goes back to those feelings and those moments, but still, yeah, he really says that that peculiar feeling that made him go back to a shelf and find this liquid. I subscribe more to the idea that he tried a little bit. Maybe he was working on it and...
Possible. It's also possible, yeah.
Un dedazo.
It's possible that he never said it.
He was so fucking curious, and also how, imagine, the perception of humankind until that point, that you didn't know that you had a psychedelic compound in your hands, and he didn't know that it was the most active psychedelic compound that exists in the planet. Okay, so then more or less we know that story that he took the bike, but then what happens with him? Because as you say, he says that not much happened that day, so then he decides to try the experiment.
Yeah, he says, well, what has happened to me? You know, it's so weird that I had this experience. What was it? And there are accounts that say that next days in the lab, he was like inhaling the solvents, you know, thinking what has caused this, and, you know, trying all stuff that might have had something to do with his weird experience, until he said like 3 days later, okay, no, I'm sure that this compound that I was working with must be the responsible for this. So he tried what he thought it was a cautious dose. It was a quarter of a milligram, 150 micrograms, and now we know that's a full-blown LSD dose.
Man, that's your first time. Holy shit. And also made by Hoffman, so the best possible.
Yeah, the best possible LSD ever.
I would say that Hoffman, after that experience, I mean, to be honest, we cannot do justice to what he describes. I would definitely recommend, to read My Problem Child. But there
I was going to say the same.
it's like there's no way, you know. But there we can say that he got a little more spiritual and mystical and understood the importance of what he had created, and actually in those times he made it readily available for pretty much anyone that wanted to explore it. No, psychologists could write a letter to Sandoz, artists could do it. It was all around the world. So maybe we can talk a little about that. Fede, what was the first reaction of society to LSD? Who was really, studying it? And then, slowly, maybe we can go back to what happens in America in the 60s after that.
Well, at first, I don't think artists could get it. I think it was only limited to scientific researchers. And there was the condition that they publish the research and send it back to Sandoz. They said, okay, you want LSD, I give you LSD, but you have to give me back the results of your experiments. So in this way, LSD got slowly all around the world, but it was kept very underground. The first one to make tests in humans was the son of his boss, at Sandoz. He was a psychiatrist and made the first tests on humans with LSD. And they soon realized that 150 micrograms was a lot. They started to lower the dose and started taking 60 micrograms, 50. So they started to build it from the bottom up.
Wow, imagine, yeah.
It's funny. I found a book that even in Argentina, there were some psychiatrists that had LSD and made tests on subjects like in the 50s, and they were curing alcoholism, and they were having a lot of good results with their research. But the guys who had most interest were also the CIA, that were making all kinds of experiments, and they were financing a lot of scientists to make experiments on people to try to make a truth serum or try to brainwash people with LSD. It's a very dark part of it that was used for warfare. So this is how it ended up escaping the lab. There were many scientists giving it to people, giving it to students, and one of them was Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey from the Merry Pranksters is the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest, this book, which also has a movie with Jack Nicholson as a protagonist. It's a good movie. And this guy, Ken Kesey, was paid $20 at his university to allow himself to be injected with LSD in the worst setting possible, with electrodes connected to his brain and sitting on a machine, describing what was going on. And he had a very bizarre experience where he felt his thoughts were going through the lines, to the electric lines, dissolving over there. But nevertheless, he thought it was really interesting. So the guy decided to start working at this hospital, and he had the great idea of stealing all their LSD stash. So Kesey stole tons of Sandoz LSD from the hospital and said, okay, fuck you guys, I'm going away with it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Ken Kesey would be like one of the first, like Snowden with NSA, no? Like a big guy that was super inside it, that they expected to just be some random test subject, that in the end realizes the power of it. And also that is definitely the moment that what maybe Hoffman was afraid of finally happens, no? That the
Yes.
LSD is given to everyone indiscriminately, without a proper context, without any sort of information. But at the same time, this kickstarts what would be the 60s, no?
Yes, for sure. Hoffman was very against the indiscriminated use of LSD because he saw it as a sacrament, And when he saw LSD being used for parties, he was like, "Man, this is not the way to use it." But Kesey was not the only one. It happened like in other fronts as well. And Timothy Leary was one of the guys most responsible for pregoning LSD and saying everyone should do this, the youth gotta take this, we have to make the revolution because LSD has an inherent revolutionary potential, Anyone who has had an LSD experience know this. It can revolutionize your consciousness and it can revolutionize the consciousness of an entire society, as we later saw on the 60s.
I mean, it starts to do the same process that they have been suppressing so much, basically. That's that same thing that ritual and ceremonies and shamanism have been doing. Suddenly it started to happen in the people, through technology, through science. In the same year that they invented the atom bomb, they also did LSD, which is very interesting too, Like
Yes.
the power to save everyone and the power to destroy everyone.
Yes. I don't know who is the one that pointed this out, but it's a really good analogy. The Earth needed something to contrarrest the power of the atomic bomb, and LSD might have been it. But there was another vision of how to transform society and culture with psychedelics, and it was this guy called Al Hubbard, which was an OSS agent at some point, and he also had amazing experiences with psychedelics, and so he saw, okay, we have a key, we has a lot of potential to transform individuals and society, so how do we use it to change the world, So his idea was different from Leary, totally different. He thought that we need to go turning in and waking up people in power first, people who has a lot of money, a lot of power, people who really moves the course, the world.
They have the influence, yes. So basically, like a targeted attack of like waking up a few selected, figures in different parts of society, and then you had Leary, which was like everyone should take acid right now, doesn't matter, and there. Maybe we can go because until this point, it's like LSD is trapped inside either a super military hardcore program like the CIA, or it's either in the hands of like psychologists and academic side. So until then, the supply was limited. There was no many ways to get it. So the 60s didn't really start yet because it wasn't so available. So what happens now? Who comes in to change that, basically?
Well, when Leary starts to point out that everyone should take LSD, there are some guys that were having access to Sandoz. LSD supply was very, very limited, which was only escaping from scientific environments. So some guys came, and here is where enters Owsley Stanley III, which puts like on a mission. They say he was like an angel on a mission to get LSD to everyone. So they start manufacturing LSD clandestinely. He had a girlfriend who was a chemist. So they are the first ones to get to synthesize real LSD because LSD is a very tricky molecule. It's very hard to make. It's not that easy as making MDMA or 2CB. It's a very hard to make molecule. So these guys get to do it to a level where acid could be this sacrament as well, because it needs to be super pure for getting you there, to have a mystical experience. Bad acid will not get you there. It will get you more likely on a bad trip if it's bad acid. So Owsley had started doing it, and he was the sound man for the Grateful Dead as well. He was a very handy man. And so they started manufacturing millions of doses of LSD because LSD is so potent, where in a kilo you have 10,000 doses. So they made a lot, millions of doses. The most popular batch was called Orange Sunshine.
Orange Sunshine is it famously the acid that Jimi Hendrix took before burning the guitar? I think so.
Yeah, the legend goes on like that. Yeah, but we don't know.
Owsley showed up with the badge there.
Owsley, yeah, Owsley's acid for sure. He was there in the same concert. Owsley was there,
I mean, okay, so about Owsley, I mean, it's a fascinating character, and I think most of us know from him because of that famous Rolling Stone article, maybe, that was he the one with the fucking silos, like growing in...
No, that was Leonard Pickard. That was so much in the future, like in the 2000s. That's what happened. No, Owsley stopped making acid in the 60s. They busted him like 2 or 3 times because when they started making LSD, it was still legal. LSD was not illegal at this time, but you could not have access to it because Sandoz had a patent. Only the CIA was violating this patent, making acid for themselves. So, and the hippies started making acid for themselves too.
And here maybe, okay, but Owsley was like a freak, doing acid probably like in a fucking bathtub. But then how did they get it to everyone, like how they started to distribute it, or maybe there, you can share a little, how did people finally, normal people, started to get it, not just these super mega freaks connected to science and all this?
Well, there were many groups which saw acid like a sacrament which needed to revolutionize the world. One were the merry pranksters with all this acid that Ken Kesey stole, and were having this booze, the Führer, that were traveling USA, giving acid to people. They were some of them, but there was this other group of guys.
Man, Fede, I saw the bus in Oregon. I was inside the bus. Yeah.
You got into it, you got on it.
Everything. So I mean, maybe also we can share. I mean, maybe people already know, but the merry pranksters will go around in this bus and basically kind of attack people with acid everywhere they go.
Yeah, they gave acid to everyone, like, come on, freak out,
And then
these other guys,
theory.
These guys, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, they were a group of surfers from California that were actually like motorcycle gangsters before LSD, which were outlaws. And they find out about LSD, so they find out that some Hollywood producer has some LSD stash. And they go to his house, he was giving a party, and they get in the party to rob him, but they only rob his LSD. We want the acid, man. And so the guy was so scared, but say, okay, guys, here you have a nice trip. And so these guys went down to the mountains and had an acid trip, which changed their lives forever. They left the guns, they become spiritual people, and they saw their mission was spreading LSD to the world, following Lurie's message. He was kind of his guru. So at the same time, access to flying overseas in airplanes, the aeronautic industry was getting more accessible to normal people, to middle class people. So all these hippies were traveling east, also following spiritual gurus and stuff, but also going to get hashish, and finding new places to surf and finding new places to escape society, because the hippies, after they had this experience, they say, okay, fuck this society, it's all wrong. Nothing that our parents told us is going to work with our lifestyle after what we saw that the world can be,
Maybe
the world can be such a better place.
Maybe there we can mention, for example, I don't know, I think Ram Dass was maybe one of the first ones to go to India. Maybe Allen Ginsberg also following a little his footsteps.
The Beatles, George Harrison had a very profound impact with Eastern culture. A lot of people who had acid and discovered spirituality, basically, which is what was denied, as we were saying before, by Christianity, who said only spirituality allowed these hours. You had to go through us to get to God. And people took LSD and find out that God was within themselves and all around them. So say, okay, these institutions are taking the power away from us. And this is what LSD made, gave their spiritual power back to the people, their power over their own consciousness.
Finally, exactly. Like finally, so here, okay, so basically now we are in the 60s. Now the LSD is like in the streets. It starts to affect people and a whole of generation of people that were not exactly the minorities or the outlaws, actually were like the students, the future presidents or possible managers of CEOs of companies. So that suddenly they get a big problem, no? In that situation, it's like well, before we go to the end of it, we can go to what really happened in the middle, no? Like suddenly we get the biggest like reset and makeover of fashion, of music, of culture, of ideas. Spiritualism, Eastern culture starts to come in more. And there, for example, we see the big impact it had on music, for example, no? How it changed the way that people dress as well. We can see that it was like a whole generation tripping, no? It was not just some freaks on the corner.
It actually revolutionized society as a whole, and that's why I think I'm a big fan of the 60s, because I think it was like the pinnacle of Western civilization, because it was the only revolution that didn't fire any shots. It was an unarmed revolution that was really expanding and having a success. So the government saw this and said, okay, the soldiers are not going to go to the war. They don't want to go to the war. And the whole society was disrupting. At this point, Richard Nixon, who was the president, called Timothy Leary the most dangerous man alive. That's how important this revolution was.
Yeah, for example, the thing that they made the LSD a Schedule 1 drug that is next to heroin and things like this is the most crazy decision, and you can see how scared they were about this as well.
And they reacted to it, and they needed to stop this revolution. They were taking action. Maybe they had started it unwillingly when they were giving LSD to people for their scientific research. But then when it got out of their hands, they said, okay, we need to stop this. And they took action to stop it, actually. They prohibited LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, weed. They were after weed because also weed was a very important factor in this time. And the modern cannabis culture that we see today had its origin there, because this Brotherhood of Eternal Love, they were bringing back seeds from all these countries they were visiting, from India, from Afghanistan, and Colombia, Panama, all the imported weed from Thailand. And they started growing it.
Exactly.
They started making the first hybrids.
Even the soldiers were bringing seeds and going to Afghanistan. And so there, I think it's a good point there. For example, again, I go back to Deleuze and Guattari always, because he talks about decoded fluxes. So flujos descodificados in Spanish. And this is, so every now and then capitalism, in order to expand its limits and horizons, to keep continuing what it's doing, it needs to generate novelty. There has to be new things that happen that need to like bring things to a different moments, or the whole subjectivity, consumerism, everything can keep working in a new plane. And this always happens with technology, with culture advancing. So for example, we can say that the hippie culture, it's a ultra mega decoded flux. That LSD, it's a decoded flux. It's even like a liquid that permeates and goes everywhere. And this was one of the biggest first like consciousness and awareness upgrades of the whole culture at the same time. And at the same time, exactly the first like real resistance to what was being done to us, to people. In those times there was the Vietnam War, for example, for America, and also the rest of the world was like being affected by this psychedelic culture. Even Argentina, Europe, they all were deeply affected by the ideas, and also then deeply affected by all the resistance of the government and the system to these completely decoded flags that they need to absorb again and flatten again, so it doesn't, create a problem. Before maybe going a little deeper into to what we think of all of this. Okay, we're in the 60s, and while all of this is happening, music and Allen Ginsberg and Ram Dass, there's also some guy coming from Irish descendants that also has a brother, and they are in Berkeley, and yeah, what happens there? Maybe we can finally bring in Terence McKenna, because he was living all this era, and yeah, maybe you can tell us a little, what is McKenna's introduction, to psychedelics or the psychedelic realms.
Well, Terence McKenna is a key character in the psychedelic culture. He's the biggest voice in psychedelic culture. He's a true child of the 60s. He was studying the Tibetan religion, which was before the arrival of Buddhism to Tibet, which is the Bon-Po religion, which is kind of related to shamanism, to Siberian shamanism in the first place. So he was studying this, but he felt that it was not fulfilling what he was searching for. It was not absolutely something new, something different from reality. He was looking for something else, something bigger. So he had experiences, particularly with DMT at Berkeley, which really shattered his ground, And so he and his brother, they thought that they needed to be in this DMT realm for a longer time to bring ideas back. They needed to bring ideas back from the DMT dimension. So they say, okay, how do we do this? Okay, they went to the Amazon jungle to look for ayahuasca, which was this brew shamans use, which contained DMT and which lasted longer than a smoked DMT trip that can only last like 10 minutes.
How did they know about ayahuasca? And wait, did you already share how the fuck did McKenna was able to smoke DMT in the 60s already? Maybe tell us a little your theory of maybe how Terence could have gotten DMT in the 60s.
Well, when they discovered all these substances, they started to search for more. They say, okay, look at this. There's LSD, there's mescaline, there's mushrooms, there's cannabis. There must be some more substances out there. And so they started looking into the literature. DMT was already discovered a long time ago, like in the 1930s, was synthesized by this chemist from Hungary. Anske is his name. So this guy synthesized DMT, and people thought DMT was a synthetic compound for like 15 years, until some Brazilian guy found it in the roots of Mimosa tenuiflora, Jurema preta, which is the main source of DMT today as well. But DMT is all around the world, the natural world. In humans, our body produces it, the plants, bark of plants, seeds of plants, roots of plants. It's everywhere. That's why it's called the spirit molecule.
Yeah, exactly. I guess if people want to get the longer version of this information, here another book recommendation would be The Spirit Molecule, by Rick Strassman.
Yes. So Nick Sand, which was one of the most famous acid chemists, he was a disciple of Owsley, or not a disciple, but he was related to him. Nick Sand was synthesizing DMT at the end of the 60s, and they were also spreading it among the most involved people of the psychedelic movement. So Nick Sand claims he's the one that discovered that DMT could be smoked. He tells a story where he had some DMT accidentally drop over a hot plate and smelled this extremely weird smelling thing and say, okay, man, I would smoke this. So
my God.
Nixon claims he discovered it. So people were using it. Also, Tim Leary had experienced it, and people were sharing all these substances. Alexander Shulgin was synthesizing all of these compounds. MDA was more underground, but was there. So I think McKenna, who was very connected with the academic circles and the psychedelic circles of the most hardcore California, I think he's tried DMT there, and they needed to. They said they needed more time inside of this dimension to bring new ideas.
Hyperspace. Yeah, they wanted more time in the hyperspace. Yeah. And okay, there I can connect where you left off your story. I have a question which now I cannot remember. McKenna, did he try mushrooms before going to Amazon?
No, he didn't.
So okay, now we are finally. McKenna decides to go to Amazon, trying to stay like prolong this experience that he has when he smokes DMT. I mean, he has the famous story, the I remember the very very first time. So yeah, I mean that's also I recommend guys you should watch all McKenna's talks. For me, he's the top guru forever, and I wish he lived more, so he could talk about life and not just drugs and their effects. But I mean, there's no better storyteller than Terence, and I think that his imagination and was already very vivid. But okay, now take us finally, Fede, to when they finally found this house in the middle of the jungle in Iquitos, in Peru, and they stay in a place called La Chorrera. So tell us a little what happens with him there, with his original
yes, but
plan.
La Chorrera is not in Iquitos. They went to
Ecuador, no?
Colombia first. Ecuador or Colombia. It was it was Colombia because it was the Rio Putumayo where they were going through in this book, Through Hallucinations, which is a very recommended book from Terence. All of Terence's book, I think we both will recommend you to read them if you haven't. They're very funny, very full of information. And Terence is a great storyteller, like Nico said. But they went to this place, La Chorrera. They were looking for ayahuasca and another mysterious preparation called ukuhe, which was a form of orally active DMT. But they could not find this. Instead, they found Stropharia mushrooms growing there, psilocybe cubensis mushrooms. So they start eating mushrooms, and they also had access to ayahuasca roots. Ayahuasca, it was Banisteriopsis. Yeah, they were smoking Banisteriopsis before eating the mushrooms to use the MAOI effect to potentiate the effect of the mushroom. And so they find that if they make they were making magic, absolutely. They find that if they make certain sounds, they had this theory that they could bond the MAOI, the harmine, to their DNA.
Metabolites, so basically, okay, so they get there to the jungle, no, and they start to eat all these mushrooms, and then one time they realize that if they smoke this root bark, they get like they were saying, they were calling it like DMTV, something like this, like they would get like 15 minutes of like prolonged hallucinations because this compound that inhibits enzymes was working, so they could get a bigger release of DMT. And I think it's Dennis, no, that starts to make all these mechanical, weird insect like sounds. And I think it's Dennis, the person that kind of drives Terence more crazy, no, with his craziness there. And they decide to design this experiment, no? And maybe you can tell us more about what was the goal or what they were trying to do.
Yeah, they thought they were very, very crazy, in a psychedelic way. They had a scientific background, but they were like disrupting their scientific mindset with psychedelics and bringing it to a psychedelic dimension. So they were also have a profound sense of alchemy. So they wanted to try using this access in this dimension, in these expanded states of consciousness, to transform reality. So Dennis, in a strong mushroom trip, starts making this sound, which was like you said, like a mechanical animal, like alien kind of sound, and it was like very transformative in the moment that it happened, where they were trying to bond this state into their DNA permanently. And
that was the experiment. The experiment was to use sound and change so the metabolite, so this thing that helps you stop the absorption of the breakdown of DMT. So they were trying really to make it permanent, so to forever be in that land, basically. I forgot that was the exact idea, you know.
That was the goal. And many people will argue that the experiment was successful, because if you listen to Terence talking after this, he talks like he's on mushrooms all the time, or some kind of voice that comes from this dimension talks through him.
I feel more like that. I feel more sometimes the feeling that he's channeling, and it's like the mushrooms are talking to you, you know? I don't know. For me, so in the book, when they're describing this, and here I can make a side note about my personal impact, that book, that all the images, all the description of the experiences that Terence have there with the... So Terence is there with his brother and another girl and another friend, and they even get problems between his girlfriend and all that bullshit. But Terence like didn't give a fuck. Terence was like captivated by what he starts to experience. I think the first experience I have in this book is that he tries to watch the normal flow of the river, and the river stops, no, and it stops flowing. So that's the first moment that he gets like a little sign that something is happening, and he starts to think about time. And then they get the UFO in the mist, no, before the experiment. You remember that he describes one of the...
I didn't.
Man, this story is one of the most crazy one, and it's like a little unreleased. So one day they take mushrooms, it's raining, then they decide to go outside because it's too hot inside the hut. And then he pretty much describes walking through some field when there is some mist from the jungle, you know, when there is those vapors. And then he reaches the river, and he kind of uses the phrases like, there it was standing, you know, like a full-blown UFO, like looking like a cartoon, doing beep, beep, boing, boing. Like he puts all this in the book, you know. So there it's like the level of synchronicity and insanity that is happening to him, it's insane. And then when they do this experiment, which also the idea was to like join matter and spirit, you know, to do the final... the holy work, you know, to discover the philosophical stone. Yeah, exactly. So like to turn everything into gold, basically. So they really trip that they are alchemists. They really trip that they can, through a very small experiment, affect the entire cosmos. And actually, the experiment is successful, no? Because if you remember, they get this crazy hallucination. They see like a sphere that disappears into the room.
This purple liquid thing from the other dimension, they try to bring into this one.
Fifth dimensional fluid that is made of information.
That's it. Yeah.
And I have to say, when he describes that, so now I can finally explain to people, that's Abyss Ooze. You know, the thing that is coming through the nose and the eyes of Terence McKenna, you know, the fifth dimensional fluid that comes from the fifth dimension that is made of transformative information that just by touching it transforms you. So yeah, that's a real definition.
I didn't know that. Super good one.
Taken from that moment. And so, okay, what happens with Dennis after the experiment? Maybe you can tell us that.
Well, Dennis enters in a mystical state that lasted like for 10 days. You know, he says like that, you know, he's fully naked in the jungle all the time. He went a bit crazy, thinking he was talking like in an imaginary phone with his mom, having conversations, and he went like fully crazy.
I love also how Terence describes how he goes back. So he said that first he identified with this universe, then he identified with this galaxy, and then, you know, with this planet, and then slowly, you know, narrowed it down that he's a single consciousness, and it's Dennis McKenna in the jungle. So yeah, wow, that whole book for me changed a lot. And I think for me, Terence is still like the prince of all this time, you know. He's so refined, so deep, you know. His work is so beautiful. His descriptions are, you know, when he talks about like you know, the self, how is it, the self-transforming machine elves, like all these concepts, no, he talks about Fabergé, like he talks about self-transforming machine elves that are singing Fabergé X into existence, for example, you know.
Yes.
It's like, fuck you, man. That's good poetry, you know, that's good writing, you know. You believe him that he experienced that side, you know, and yeah, I think with McKenna also and the presentation of this hyperspace and DMT, it's very crazy that everyone experienced similar things. So, what do you think about that, man? How is possible that when people smoke DMT or drink ayahuasca, there is a certain imagery that always appears there? You know what? How do you explain that, Fede?
It's a very good question, because there's a part that could be kind of explained by, I don't know, by how to put it into words, but we could say like the geometry of the alkaloids and their interaction with our synapses. That's one part, but the other part, I would say that these plants are keys. You know, they are keys which open doors and open doors to some other dimensions that are parallel to this one and have their own existence. Uh, Inside of us, outside of us, you know, it gets blurry over there. But I think these realms exist and we can tap into them. There are frequencies that when we use these plants and these compounds, tune our minds, which are electromagnetic brains, uh, tune them to synchronize with these other frequencies, with our other dimensional frequencies of existence, you know. So that's why we can enter almost the same places and also have, you know, telepathy or enter both two people at the same time, had the same visions, because these worlds exist and they are like parallel dimensions that are totally interconnected with this one. And it sounds like very, you know, mystical, but you can experience that. It's not fantasy.
Exactly. That's a thing that you know, I'm a fairly skeptical person. I don't believe every fucking bullshit that every hippie tells me that they have in their trip. You know, they burn my brain with bullshit stories in my life, and I still know that you know, when you get to experience that, and if I would need to do like a study where I put, you know, some things in common that people describe, it always goes back to the fucking same. It always goes back to almost the thing that you know, like for example, there is this Tibetan chod ritual, no, it's also connected to Bon, no, like McKenna was studying like that shamanic ritualistic part of pre-Tibetan Buddhism, and they had this idea that in, you know, one of the main initiation rituals was that the demons eat you, destroy your body, tear you apart until you don't exist, and then they reconstruct you and they add like this stone in your third eye. So this idea, no, that you go up to like a fifth dimensional plane where it almost works like the the place where, you know, you get repaired, or the place where you go to when you are dead, or the place where you're waiting before you are born. I mean, it starts to line up with a lot of knowledge of a lot of religions that has been around since a very long time, and it starts to make a lot of sense, you know. And there's like many cultural filters to explain it, but everyone comes saying the same, man, I saw these beings that they kind of healed me, and then they told me to come back and like explain this to people or put it in my art, or change this aspect in my life. So I think that's why McKenna, DMT, tryptamines, and all his imagination to describe it so vividly, I think that's also something that affected me a lot, you know, because I died to see those realms, you know, and to get there. And when you finally get your fucking download, you know, when you finally open up and you do everything right to be in the right state to get the download, then you experience this knowledge. So then for me, it's like, it's not it's not an opinion. You know, I was there, I experienced that, you know, that concept revealed itself to me. And in the end, maybe yeah, it's like I lived it. It wasn't in. I know the difference between my imagination and magic.
Sure.
I know the difference between me wishing something really bad and something happening to me. I can recognize empirically the that I'm experiencing it. So maybe you can share about that side, Fede, because okay, now we went to like the full quantum physics side, fucking aliens and other dimensions. But what about the healing aspect? What do you feel that is what can we bring back of all those explorations, of going so far out?
It's a very good point, because what's the purpose of all this? What's the purpose of going into these dimensions? What's the purpose of shamanism? And I think it's self-transformation will be the first. If we want to transform the world around us, which is pretty fucked up, as we can see, we need to transform ourselves. We need to transform our vision of the world, because our subjectivity is what defines the world. So I think transformation will be the main thing, and also contemplating the mystery. I don't know if that was a Terence quote as well, but you need
That's
the
very good.
mystery of existence and how to understand it, because we are here and we don't know shit. All that you can know from your experience. Other people's experience is not used for you. It's not good. You can have these charts, these maps that people will humanity has been creating. It's very good that you mention all the Tibetan aspect, because I think the Tibetan culture is one of that has charted better these places that we go on DMT.
That's a very good word that you choose. No, they charted it, man. They explored it. They were there. And the amazing thing from the Tibetans is that probably there is not a lot of psychedelic substances around. So also it was like hardcore meditation, no, that they did.
Yes.
Because for me, the Book of Dead, it's a pretty good explanation of the psychedelic experience. And of course, we are basing ourselves that Timothy Leary wrote his own Book of the Dead to guide
based on the original one.
But for me, after a few psychedelic experiences where the direct experience with the knowledge is there, it's a little hard for me not to believe, for example, that reincarnation it's a more logical model, for example, for how souls work, and me, I'm not a guy that this I'm saying it from the most rational point of view of my experience. It's not a hippie thing, Reincarnation seems logical.
Of course, because once you have experience that you are not your body, that you are not your ego, that you cannot also travel to other dimensions and be different aspects of yourself. You have experience. Well, you had your first DMT trip where you actually thought you were dead. I remember that we published it in the magazine. It was pretty hardcore. And so after you have this kind of experience, you know that the life is not where, or death, better put, is not where everything ends. So and once you have out of body experiences, also you can know for your experience that this is actually possible, that your consciousness can exist outside of your body. So if you can inhabit this body, can also travel to other dimensions and then come back. And that's how the oldest Eastern religions put it, like that's what's going to happen. I'm more related to Buddhism and their ideas in respect of this, of reincarnation, how does it work, the laws of karma, but always interpreting in my own way, not subscribing to any dogma. But that I think that's the importance of having access to these places, to form up your own understanding of the world, your own sanity, your own cosmovision, which is so important to have, then to share it, with people like you.
I have some. Don't watch TV. Don't read magazines. Create your own roadshow.
For sure. That's what I think I do. I try not to put things inside of my mind that come from outside, Of course, I love to read books and watch movies too, but it's important to create your own vision of the world. So psychedelics for that and shamanism for that will really, really open your mind. I was like a very scientific, like you know, rational, super rational, skeptic, until I went to the Amazon jungle. When I went to the Amazon jungle, it cracked my mind open, you know, my brain made like pah, like that, and I saw the realness of the spiritual realms, of these ethereal realms of existence that are as real as this solid table that I'm touching right now. But this you don't know until you experienced it. You know, you can read a lot about it. You know, it will be a belief, but belief it's not good for me. You know, it doesn't work for me. I'm not a believer. I need to experience things, and so I think.
I like there. I can give you a quote of Carl Jung. I don't believe, I know.
Yeah, for sure.
Example, Fede, that's a good one. Tell us a little, you know, because you did all the reading, you did all the homework, and also you had the moment that, you know, it's like, okay, you did all the reading, all the homework, but you still are being careful, you know, you're still not really trying to tear down your ego or your system. So, yeah, maybe you can share us how was it for you? You were really in the jungle, you know, you were really there with the shaman, you were really there, you know, seeing how they cook it, living there. So maybe tell us did you go, and you know, how was it for you, the whole experience? I know it's a lot to put in words, but maybe let's see what you can share from that moment, you know.
Well, it was one of the best decisions I made in my life to go to the jungle, to take ayahuasca, to change my life, actually. And as I was saying, it really cracked my mind open because I had read all these books, I had did all my homework, I started studying plants and psychedelics since I was very young. But then you need to go there where you have been reading about, you know, it's like reading, oh, I'm going to travel to this beach, which is so cool. But until you're not there, everything you can read will not make nothing for it, because words, especially when it comes to these dimensions, are not enough. Words cannot grasp it. You go to realms which are transrational, you know, rationality won't serve you there. You have to leave it a bit, it will break your rational mind to go there. So that's what I was more impressed with by my stay in the jungle, to see a reality that goes beyond the rational mind and goes beyond words. So it's kind of difficult to bring it back here and share it. But
so, for example, something that I take from what you say, and I also agree, I would say then that the first requirement to really go deep into yourself is getting yourself out of your zone of comfort as much as you can. Wouldn't you agree?
Sure, that was my first and my biggest going out of my comfort zone. You know, I was very pleased at my home, smoking a lot of good homegrown weed, you know, but I had to get out of my conformity, you know, to really go deeper. Because if you stay where you are, you will never go to know yourself in deeper ways. But it takes a lot of courage, and it takes bravery, but it's also dangerous. You know, it's not a thing that you can do thinking it will be all funny and all super cool and wow visions. You know, like Carl Jung said, you know, you don't get enlightened by envisioning figures of light. You get enlightened by putting light into your darkness, you know, like looking where is the darkness on inside of you. So that's the way to enlighten yourself. And it's not easy to do that. You know, you have to look into your shadow. You have to look into the worst aspects of yourself. So shamanism has a dark side of, well, we could say, which is not easy, you know, to kill your ego, to let go to everything you think you are, the construction you have made of yourself, with the reflection from others, with your own ideas, what your family, your fathers have taught you. You know, I think one of the most useful and, you know, the most important uses we can make from psychedelics is to deconstruct ourselves which is not easy and is not pleasant all the times, but it's certainly worth it if we are going to make a good use of our past on this world, on this planet. To make a good use of our life, it's to live many lives inside of one, I would say, because the archetypical shamanic path is to die on the trip, this dismembering by these entities you were talking before. You are completely torn apart, and then you are recreated, and you are recreated as new. And it's a never-ending world. So the shamanic path is not easy. It's not an easy one. It's not all funny. It's not funny at all, I would say.
Here, for example, I would like to quote one of the pioneers of chaos magic in the 80s, Peter Carroll. He says, "An initiation happens outside of time, so an initiation never ends."
Totally agreed.
Me also, I wanted to go back, like, yeah, fuck yeah. Like, if I need to say something very clear that normally I don't say my opinion so directly, but yes, it's like shamanism and magic and the real techniques of the sacred technology, like McKenna would call it, are a very serious thing that can seriously bring transformation in your life only and only if you also sign up to clear all your darkness, all your shadow, which that work takes a very, very long time. It may take lifetimes, and only then you can really, really use all this experience to really transform you, and that will and should transform people around you, also if they're willing as well. So in right now, these are maybe one of the last few techniques and defenses that we have available to make our reality, because we are living right now surrounded by algorithms that are studying our behavior and are controlling the information we see. And I would suggest everyone to watch, for example, now in Netflix there is a very good documentary called The Moral Dilemma, and it's all the people that left Facebook, Google, Twitter, in total disgust of how the company was working, and they explain how the algorithms work and how our reality is being defined by these machines that are already a little out of our control. And definitely magic and shamanism and creating your culture is absolute, like a sacred holy mission right now. So that's why also I believe so strongly, me, I'm pretending to be just a streamer, but this is disguising real information, and I'm really happy also that almost 100 people stay with us, Fede, listening to us. And I'm very happy we can go so deep into this, and I was thinking, since we mentioned the dark side, let's talk a little about the other thing. You and me, we come from electronic dance culture from the 90s, and we also know that there is a very bad side to drugs. You can take million hits of acid and never evolve, and you can go and take ayahuasca and also avoid working on yourself and avoid,
Sure.
There seems to be a very, very important component where the individual needs to take a decision to actually go through it. So maybe, yeah, we can talk a little about that, like what do you see, in electronic music culture with drugs, and maybe also if you have like an advice, or a better idea of how it should be, or how do you think, yeah, it would be more beneficial in general.
Well, I love psytrance culture, psychedelic culture, and I think, as we were saying at the beginning of our conversation, that this has all the elements that we, as childs of the 90s, converged into the most interesting way to combine technology, shamanism, dance, and I think the better way to use it is to make a proper use of all these tools that we have. Like you were mentioning, the technology today, the algorithms around us are controlling us, what we see, what we think. But the tools are not the problem. The problem is the way we use them. So I think drugs are not good and drugs are not bad. Drugs are what you made of them. So I will recommend to make the best use possible of these substances, acknowledging that the power of transformation that they have is so intense, and it will be for good and also for bad. So we have to be very careful the way we use drugs, and we have to be very careful in the way we use technology as well. I think parties and festivals are great opportunities to find the others, like Terence said. Because it's so important, because the work you have to do is individual work, always on yourself. But finding other people doing the same work is so important. Having friends with who you can have this kind of chat we're having right now. Sharing this occult information and the things that the system doesn't want us to do, to be free. I think it's important to get our freedom, to keep our freedom, which is being taken away all the time from us. And I think it's so important to keep our freedom, and freedom of thought is the first one. Freedom of feelings, because we are told by culture all the time which feelings are accepted, which ones are not accepted.
Yeah,
So
and the freedom to explore your fucking mind as you choose to also, no?
for sure, man, this is key. This is the key of the whole chat we're having, the freedom of having your own mind at your own service, not to the service of someone else or some obscure company of some government, So it's a work. It's an ongoing work to keep yourself awake, to keep yourself open in a world that's difficult, which is wild, oppressive. So I think it has a very good power. This movement of which we are part of. If we put love in our hearts and we open our hearts to our community, to the people we love, and share ourselves in a context that's appropriate for it, that allows it, is the way to keep growing and evolving as a community. Bonding, creating bonds through drugs, for example, through technology. But if you use them good, it will provide you with this opportunity, and if you use them bad, it will produce the opposite effect.
Me, maybe if I can join in, like for advice, I would say that the information is there, and it's there because it fucking helps, So definitely, for example, I think you and me, we come from reading Arrowhead, which was a very important website with the information. Arrowhead's slogan is "Know your dose." Which is very important. Know your drug, know your dose, know your dealer, know where, know your source. I think it's that. Know your source, know your dose.
Know your substance.
Yeah. And it's like that very important. Also, definitely for younger people, I'm going to say I'm a person that experienced many things when I was young, and I got the best trips when I was older. When I had enough experience in my life to understand what is life, what is death, what is to be sad, what is to be happy, what is to be inspired. So definitely, I would recommend a lot of study and a lot of preparation. And man, there is a reason why rituals exist. There are many ways to do rituals. You can go to the jungle in ayahuasca and take part of one of the most ancient rituals that we have that has not been interrupted ever. You can go also to Mexico and have that experience. And me also, I come a lot from Chaos Magic and the 80s, which is the idea that you take all this information to design your own ritual. And me, I have read many books of Chaos Magic, of Western magic, from Aleister Crowley to all the material from, I don't know, Madame Blavatsky, from all the Western mysticism tradition. And me, what I can say is that these things work, in the same way that McKenna said, okay, if you believe in mantras, then try mantras on a serious dose of psilocybin. Exactly. And then you will see what happens. The same thing I would say to that. All these rituals, all this magic, if you follow the steps and you really, really do the exchange, when you really put your soul and your sanity in line, there is a lot of reward and a lot of danger. And it's not something that should be used just for entertainment. It should be really used when you need to do something in your life, where you need more power, where you need to heal yourself, or when you really need to commit yourself to a transformation that you really need to power up in a new way. So we should be very thankful that we have the possibility to change our entire perception of ourselves and our reality, but also doing it too much doesn't allow you to produce anything. If you are continuously all the time being deconstructed, then you never give yourself time to be constructed, you know. So that is my biggest advice. Like, wait until you're older, read about it, know what you're fucking doing, and then do it in a sacred context. I would even say that if you want to have a serious psychedelic experience, it's better sometimes at home or in another situation that is not a party. I understand that parties is the gateway and the way many people get in contact with these substances, but definitely I would love to invite everyone to reflect deeply on the fact that this can be a key and a door to change your life, to know yourself, and also at one point, it's enough too. There's a point where you have enough information that you just need to go back to work, because if you get back to that state, the aliens or your higher self will just tell you, bro, go back to work. Like, what are you doing here, tripping again? You know that there's not so much that you're going to discover, and you're going to discover more on the real life where you can really make things grow. Because in the fifth dimension, there's no time, so things don't grow. And in this lower plane, things evolve, things grow. Where you put your energy, things change. You can shape time, you know, very slowly. You can carve, you know, yourself and your art. So yeah, that for me also is the essence of all this talk, of all this conversation. And Fede, definitely we have a little more ground to cover, but maybe as a last question, I wanted to ask you, maybe you can tell us a few books that would be important for people to, you know, where they can go and expand this information. And yeah, maybe we, one of these other weekends, we can continue a little with the second part and go with our experiences and what really happened. But maybe now you can give everyone some homework, you know, some books to read and some inspiration. And yeah, maybe that could be our last question.
First, let me tell you that I totally agree with you with on the advice to the people on how to use these tools that we have. I'm 100% agree with you. And the books that have guided me and have a great impact on me were, well, Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna. It's a great book. We've been quoting him a lot. Then another book that had a great impact on me was Albert Hoffman's Inner Outworld, Mundo Interior, Mundo Exterior in Spanish, which is an essay on it's a philosophical essay from Hoffman. It's a really nice book. Then there's a great book if you're interested in psychedelic culture. If you love the 60s like I do, this book is called Acid Dreams. It's an awesome book. It has a lot of information on psychedelic culture, all we've been talking about how acid transforms society and what happened. You know, it's like taking a trip back to the 60s reading this book. So I really recommend it, Acid Dreams. And then a book that had a good impact on me lately was Stanislav Grof's book, The Cosmic Game.
In our next conversation, we should get a little deeper into Grof, which we totally forgot in this.
Yeah, we didn't name him.
And me, I read 65 books of Grof, so yeah, definitely, guys. Just to say quickly, Grof was one of the first persons to be able to legally conduct experiments on normal test subjects that were willing to take the acid. So this was psychologists, artists, normal people in Czech Republic, and it was a little after all the discovery, and it was a rare thing that Czech Republic allowed to do it, but this allowed him to develop his own view of the psychedelic experience and write a lot of books. Yeah, like pretty much his own cosmology, you know,
Yes.
And he wrote extensively about his ideas. He also has a breathing technique to get into like an altered state as well. So yeah, growth, we definitely need to go back. And wait, Fede, maybe some documentaries or movies. Is there anything on the video side that you would recommend?
Well, I just saw Fantastic Fungi documentary from 2019. Super recommended, man. I really love this documentary. Dennis McKenna is on it, Paul Stamets, Andrew Whale. If you have not seen it, watch it. And if you can watch it in a good screen on high resolution, it's very, very good. Well done on the visual side. Fantastic Fungi, great documentary that I like. And there's one on Netflix now that it's so popular that's called The Last Shaman. It's not bad if you want to make an idea of what getting into a journey to the jungle is. That's a good one. It's not particularly great as Fantastic Fungi, which I really like. And then if you're interested, you can watch the documentary of The Spirit Molecule as well. If you cannot find the book, maybe you can watch the documentary, which is not as good as the book, but there will be another one. But Fantastic Fungi it really blew my mind that I just saw it.
Nice. I didn't know actually. And me, okay, if I have to like reply to your books, I'm going to mention True Hallucinations from Terence. I think we need to mention. I'm going to mention definitely for the people that are more interested in this idea of psychology and magic. I have here with me. This is called Liber Null from Peter Carroll. This is a very interesting idea on hackers meeting magic and shamanism. And then definitely I would love to encourage everyone to discover a little the work of Grant Morrison. And I would suggest, normally he's a comic book writer, but he's a very successful chaos magician. And I would suggest maybe the best thing to start would be video, and it's called Disinfo, and it's Disinfo, like disinformation, just short, and then Grant Morrison, and it's a 40-minute talk where he talks about his alien abduction in Kathmandu and how he used chaos magic and drugs and culture to design his own life. He shows how he made himself a character in his comic book and changed his entire life, and his life would change what happened to the character. The character gets married to a girl that looks exactly like his wife that would meet later on. The character goes to the hospital, and he goes to the hospital with the same kind of problem. He almost dies in the hospital while making the comic book. So yeah, Grant Morrison, Disinfo talk. And then also, if you guys like it, there is another documentary about his whole work, and it's called Talking with the Gods. And he goes very deeply again into magic and technology in the modern day. This guy is not a fucking new age Enya hippie. This guy is the coolest, darkest motherfucker, and he's like one of us, but yeah, a very successful one. And yeah, Fede, I want to say thank you, man. This is so much fun, and we have a lot of things we can cover next time. So yeah, maybe we can leave it off here, and then we promise people to continue a little more. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time, sharing all the information. It's a fucking pleasure to go to these higher planes with you. You know, there people can see that we are two nerds, and yeah, this is not the first time that we do this.
Certainly not. This is the first time we do it on public on video, but not the first time. Yeah, thanks a lot to you for inviting me to do this. You know, I love to do this. I love to talk about these things, and especially with you, which we have a lot of things in common in the way we see the world and these dimensions. So it was a really pleasure for me. Thank you for inviting me and for sharing all that you are doing with your streaming channel. That is so good.
Thank you, Fede. And yeah, okay, I'm going to say goodbye to you. Thank you again. If you want, you can say goodbye there to the people that were listening. I don't know if you want.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Maybe we can share your Instagram, or maybe just the Haze Magazine one, if you would want the people
Yes.
to see a little of what you've done. And yeah, thank you, Fede. And yeah, have a good everything, and hope to have you here again very soon, man.
Thanks a lot, Nico. See you soon.